people breaking out in rashes, losing hair.
The water that was going into the homes of everyone here was filled with lead and copper.
Michigan Governor Rick Snyder has declared a state of emergency in the city of Flint to fix a man-made disaster. Where the city's 100,000 residents have been exposed to lead-contaminated water.
This is a joke, man. They poisoning us off, man. They're killing us, man.
So what caused the problem in the first place? Flint was in financial ruin. So Michigan's Governor Rick Snyder took power from the local government and turned it over to an emergency finance manager who the people didn't elect and whose job was to cut the city's budget. Darnell Early switched Flint's water source from Lake Huron to the Flint River. Flint River water is 19 times more corrosive than Lake Huron, causing lead that was already present in the city's old pipes to leach into the water at toxic levels. The normal solution would have been to add anti-corrosive agents to the water that cost $100 a day, but the state officials neglected to do so.
The moms were complaining, the pastors, the water experts came in, and it was deny, deny, deny. Unfortunately, it took evidence that children were being poisoned for a change to happen.
That found a drastic increase in the lead levels of children.
Here's the Flint.
Despite the report, the state insisted that Flint's water was safe.
Financially, mentally, physically, it's killing us. It really is.
Familiar with the images that have come out of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. Shocking images of grimy brown water, which residents were told was safe to drink. We now know, of course, that it wasn't, but even now that we know the water supply is basically poisoned, Flint residents are still being expected to pay for that water pumping out of their pipes. And as the Flint crisis rolls on, have you seen these images coming out of St. Joseph, Louisiana? Take a look. And then ask yourself these questions. Would you wash your clothes in that? Would you bathe in that? Would you let your children drink that water? Now, most of us are fortunate enough that such questions are hypothetical, but these photos in St. Joseph should remind us that what's happening in Flint is not an isolated incident, and that while the United Nations has declared water and sanitation a human right, people right here in this country are struggling to obtain it.
You know, Flint, Michigan has taken a lot of hits. All of its manufacturing jobs went bye-bye and it became an impoverished ghost town, basically. Now their drinking water is a disgusting contaminated sludge. Flint has not had it easy, to say the least. But still, I'm not so sure Flint is the community we want to go out on a limb for. Well, not me. I'm not really saying that. That is what someone from the EPA actually said about the water crisis in Flint. That Flint isn't worth going out on a limb for. One of those EPA officials makes clear that they're not so sure Flint was worth helping.
Well, Lindsay, in addition to declaring a state of emergency, the president also authorized FEMA to coordinate relief efforts in Genesee County. Lead levels have since doubled or even tripled in many cases. Lead gets distributed to bones, teeth, and soft tissues. Young people whose brains are still developing are the most at risk of experiencing irreversible health problems associated with lead poisoning. These children could end up suffering from lifelong consequences, including lowered IQ, behavioral issues, and increased criminality.
In the remote West Texas desert outside of a small town called Andrews, highly radioactive waste from nuclear power plants is being dumped into a deep hole in the ground. The waste, coming from 36 states across the U.S., will be dumped into a site that sits right on top of the Ogallala Aquifer, the world's second largest aquifer, providing water to 27% of the entire agricultural land in the United States. If this toxic nuclear waste ever leaks into the groundwater, it could affect the water supply of nearly a third of U.S. farmland. The nuclear waste dump, owned by Waste Control Specialists, was built by Harold C. Simmons, a top contributor to prominent Republicans such as former President George W. Bush and former Texas Governor Rick Perry. Its critics say this waste disposal plan is the privatization of nuclear waste management and not only a subsidy to billionaires, but will pose a grave environmental risk, and also fear the company cannot be trusted to manage such a toxic environmental threat.
And a new study by U.S. scientists shows that almost 2 million people in California and the Midwest live on aquifer sites with high uranium levels. The study was conducted by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It revealed that uranium concentration in the Midwest measured up to 89 times higher than the standard set by the Environmental Protection Agency. California aquifers proved to be even more contaminated, with 180 times the maximum contaminant level. The two aquifers provide drinking water to almost 6 million people and 1/6 of the U.S. cropland.
Governor of Michigan and the Obama administration's top environmental official are under fire for their roles in the water crisis in Flint. EPA Chief Gina McCarthy and Governor Rick Snyder received harsh words at a government hearing, with some calling on both to resign.
Democrats and Republicans are furious about Flint.
This is dated in June. Yep. And not a damn thing was done.
Both sides are split about who bears responsibility for allowing lead-poisoned water to flow into homes and businesses and schools for so long. Democrats say it's Governor Rick Snyder's fault.
Plausible deniability only works when it's plausible, and I'm not buying that you didn't know about any of this until October 2015. You were not in a medically induced coma for a year.
But Republicans are blaming the federal regulators at the EPA, telling Administrator Gina McCarthy to resign.
You need to take some responsibility because you screwed up and you messed up 100,000 people's lives. 100,000 of them. 10,000 of those people are 6 years old and younger. And you take no responsibility.
Those 100,000 lives are just in Flint. There are 6 million people spread across all 50 states getting water with unsafe lead levels from 2,000 contaminated water systems. That's according to a Blockbuster USA Today network investigation. Among the biggest problem areas, 353 schools and daycare centers in 42 states with dangerous lead levels in either the water fountains students drink from or the faucets in cafeterias where their lunches are made. The states with the most affected facilities like that are Maine, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and one sink at an upstate New York school had water toxic enough to be officially designated hazardous waste.
There are millions of homes that are served by what are called lead service lines. These are lead pipes that are connecting your individual house to the water main out in the street. And one expert says it's the equivalent of having your water delivered through a pure lead straw.
These troubling new numbers may even rise, since the only schools and daycare centers that have to test for lead are the 10% that have their own water systems.
Flint residents stormed the state capitol this week, calling for the resignation of the governor.
There's a water crisis in Flint, Michigan. The governor is asking President Obama to declare Flint a disaster area, but residents say the governor is the disaster.
Obama drank a glass of filtered water. He said filtered water is safe for anyone over the age of 6.
You hear a lot about government overreach. Oh, he's for big government. Listen, it's not government overreach to say that our government's responsible for making sure you can wash your hands in your own sink, or shower in your own home, or cook for your family. These are the most basic services.
Her tongue is as an arrow shot out. It speaketh deceit. One speaketh peaceably to his neighbour with his mouth, but in heart he layeth his wait.
This week, the National Guard started distributing bottled water to residents.
This week, the National Guard started distributing bottled water to residents.
This week, the National Guard started distributing bottled water to residents.
Now, health officials are investigating a spike in Legionnaire's disease. There have been 87 cases of the pneumonia-like disease since the water switch, and 10 people have died.
And unfortunately, people will have died from this decision.
FEMA says they'll respond to the governor's emergency request.
And the Lord saith, Because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, neither walked therein, but have walked after the imagination of their own heart, and after Balaam, which their fathers taught them. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink.
It's a part of the world that's known for its snow caps and clean water, but even here in Colorado, lead is a concern.
High lead levels exceeding the 15 parts per billion.
That's the maximum allowable level in the U.S. 23 water systems in Colorado are currently dealing with lead that exceeds the so-called action level. According to studies by USA Today and the Associated Press, well over 1,000 other water systems in the U.S. have also crossed that line.
Adding to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, more than 20,000 Detroit residents will have their water supply turned off. The city's water department claims those residents haven't paid their bills. Some critics have called the water shutoff a human rights violation. It's no surprise Detroit residents clearly are frustrated with their local and state governments, and they're fed up with all of the corruption.
That leaves 47,000 students with no place to go.
Thousands of people in this city are struggling this morning to keep water running into their homes, and the city is facing a second straight day without teachers in the schools.
No justice, no peace.
Detroit teachers were in the streets instead of in the classrooms on Monday. The sickout was called because city schools are expected to run out of cash. That means no money for teachers, summer school, or special education programs.
Our school system is falling apart.
Detroit schools include buildings in major disrepair, some infested with mold and rodents. In debt for several years now, the schools have stayed afloat by taking short-term loans from the state and now owe $3.5 billion. But the Motor City is facing another major problem. 20,000 households owe money on their water bills. Starting today, the city of nearly 700,000 will turn off the water supply to those homes.
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it.
outbreak of a rare blood infection. It's spreading across Wisconsin and Michigan, and so far it's linked to as many as 17 deaths. Dozens more have been sickened. The bacteria is called Elizabeth Kengia.
It can cause serious blood infections or meningitis. 50 cases in southern Wisconsin and a huge number of deaths. So this is truly considered an outbreak, Elation.
And again, where is it coming from? The source. So important.
It usually spreads in water sources.
It usually spreads in water sources.
We're not necessarily seeing it in sinks. We're not necessarily being able to find it in air conditionings. So now the experts are really trying to look at food sources or even personal hygiene products, things like lotion, toothpaste. They're really trying to turn over all the leaves to see where they can find out.
And water has been shut off at a California prison after an inmate contracted Legionnaire's disease. One inmate taken to the hospital. There are at least 30 other suspected cases. The source of the disease is still being investigated as San Quentin Prison tries to control the outbreak.
Idea where this stuff is coming from, and they want answers. 7 Action News reporter Anu Prakash joins us live with the latest. Anu.
Well, some people who live in this area were thinking that maybe that mystery substance was coming from a military kind of aircraft, since Selfridge Air National Guard Base is so close by, but Selfridge says it doesn't look like it. What is this stuff that has landed on driveways, cars, and porches in Harrison Township? Paul Schluto came home to find this black stuff splattered all over his property. He says he can't seem to get an answer from anyone.
You feel almost like a lost cause.
But this afternoon, fire officials came out to collect samples of the mystery substance. It's been found on another 5 to 7 houses on Ballard and Edmond Streets. The fire chief says it's not bird droppings, but it's hard to tell what it is.
There was a concern that it was a flammable liquid, and it wasn't. It's more of an ash-type consistency that has a little bit of, it seems to have an oily type consistency as well.
Some residents think it could have come from a plane, since Selfridge Air National Guard Base is so close by. But Selfridge now says there's no indication this substance came from any type of military aircraft.
I don't know what it's going to do to my truck. I don't know what's going to, if they can get this off of my drive.
For now, it is a little bit of a mystery.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.